Lights, camera, action.
Hello, friends.
Hello.
I'm Jon,
I'm Emily.
and this is Married to Movies, and welcome back. We hope you guys had a very nice Thanksgiving.
Yes.
I'm sure some of you realized that last week we did not release an episode, and that was because we wanted to take a break, spend some time with our family, and that was not originally planned, but we're really glad we did. It was a good time, and we hope that you guys had a lot of fun with your families too. But we're back, we're here, and we are ready to talk about Dune, the 2021 version.
Correct.
Not the 1984 version.
There are a few different versions, actually.
Well, yeah, but 84. I was right.
Okay.
So yes, we're not talking about that version. We're talking about the 2021 version. And we have a guest on the show today. So that's going to actually be the primary focus of this podcast, is going to be that section of, I guess the episode is going to take up most of the content. So we are welcoming back on to the show and into the studio my brother Josh. He has been a guest on the podcast before. Last season, he was on our episode covering Batman Begins. The season before that, season 1,
Gladiator.
was on Gladiator, which Gladiator 2 just came out.
It did. We have not seen it yet.
We have not. We've heard it's worth a watch. Not as good as the first, but, we'll let you be the judge of that. We haven't seen it, so go back, listen to our episode covering the first Gladiator.
And then go to the movies.
And go check it out. But anyways, yes, this is Josh's third time on the podcast. We had a lot of fun with him. Josh, thank you again for coming on and being with us. It's always a blast having you in the studio. And I mean, I may be partial, but I just like hanging out with my brother. So hopefully you guys enjoy it too. But I think without further ado, we can go ahead and jump right in.
Alrighty. Well, as Jon previously said, Dune came out in 2021, specifically October 22nd of 2021.
Wow.
It was directed by Denis, how do you say his last name? Villeneuve? Villeneuve?
No, that is not how you say it. It is Denis, not Dennis. Denis Villeneuve.
Okay, well, yeah, just forget that I even said anything.
That's all right.
Okay.
I had to watch a video to pronounce it correctly.
Okay, and then the cast was star-studded, like lots of huge celebrities.
Loaded.
So I didn't get all of them because it's a pretty big cast, but I got the main ones, I guess. So it is starring Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Javier Bardem, Jason Momoa, Stellan Skarsgård, Josh Brolin, and Dave Bautista.
Yes.
It was distributed by Warner Bros. It has a runtime of 2 hours and 35 minutes. It is rated PG-13, and its budget was $165 million with a box office total of $429 million.
Oh, yeah. It took me a minute. I was like, seriously? But I forgot this released during COVID.
Yes.
So that's probably pretty good numbers, all things considered.
Yeah, and I feel like I remember, I could be completely making this up, or maybe I saw it about a different movie, but I feel like I remember there being some pushback because they ended up releasing Dune on HBO.
Yeah, HBO Max to
at
be
the
streamed.
same time
Yes.
that they released it in theaters. And so that is partially why the box office total was lower than
Yes.
what you would expect, because, people were like, oh, well, we can just stream it at home. And especially because of COVID, it was just a, yeah, just a tough situation. But I believe that it was the director or maybe the producers or maybe all of them that were not super happy about that.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it went. So
yeah, that's just the way that it shook out. And, I mean, I think it all worked out. They got a part 2 and the third one is going to be coming out. So I think they did fine.
yeah. Okay. So I kind of struggled to find a lot of fun facts on this movie, which I was surprised about because I feel like usually with newer movies, I'm able to find a lot more.
Yeah.
But it was just a little sparse. So I apologize in advance, but it works out since we have our interview later on. So my first fact is that the Atreides Castle set was 20,000 square feet and had its own weather system with clouds.
What?
I know. I need to do some deeper research into it, but like it was
Its
like
own
this
weather system.
Yeah, I don't even know how. I don't know.
Okay.
But
Wow. Very interesting.
I'm sure that you will probably touch on some of this in production details, but I know a lot of the sets were, larger than life. Like they didn't want to use a lot of CGI and
Yeah, they tried to stick to as many practical effects as they could. Which,
even the sandworms were not CGI. Did you know that?
well, that's not entirely.
I was totally kidding.
Okay, I was gonna say I can't speak to that, but I was gonna say I know that
No, they
there
were
was
real
a lot
life,
of CGI.
real life worms.
Yes, they found them in the desert and just filmed them, trained them, filmed them,
Rode
Yeah.
them.
Yes.
Okay, moving on. Bad joke. My next fact.
I thought it was funny.
Okay. My next fact is that this was based on a science fiction novel by Frank Herbert that was written in 1965.
Yes.
So, kind of going off of that, people said that Dune was unfilmable, but that did not stop some from trying. As we previously said, there was an adaptation in 1984.
Which was very poorly received.
Correct. It was a flop.
Yes, and the director, what is his name? David Lynch.
Yes.
He even later disowned the movie because
Really?
it was just very poorly received and did not do well. Anyways.
Yeah. So before David Lynch, there was another one. The first one was, I'm going to butcher this name, Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Yeah, so that was not an actual film. It was a pitched version. It was a film that never came to be.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yes. So, yes, Alejandro Jodorowsky. There's another R in there.
Yeah, I truly don't know.
I'm not sure. His original pitch was for a 14-hour film
Oh my
adaptation.
word. That's awful.
Yes, in the 1970s, and it failed due to funding. I mean, I guess it would be interesting to see what would have happened if that played out. However,
Can you imagine like waking up at 8 a.m., watching a movie and you're not done until 10 p.m.?
No. And honestly, that sounds terrible. Like, it'd be cool to kind of sit in something for that long and to just like go on that journey like once,
Yeah.
and experience it. But, it's too long.
It's too long.
But anyways, it failed and it actually became the subject of a documentary
Oh, you stole my thunder. I was just about to say that.
in 2013 called Jodorowsky's Dune.
Yes.
Which honestly, I'm kind of interested in watching the documentary now.
Yeah, me too.
Just, like to know a little bit more about the backstory here. Because I would have to imagine that he would have had to pursue this pretty much self-funded. Like, there's no studio. I mean, probably not ever, but not in the 70s. That's going to say, yeah, let's fund and film a 14-hour movie. Nobody does that. Like,
Right.
so, anyways.
Yeah. So we've got Alejandro's failed try, and then David Lynch's adaptation in 1984. And then there was also a mini series in 2000 that basically nobody remembers apparently. But they decided to try again 2021, and I would say that this one was a success.
Yes.
Especially compared to all of the flops before.
Yes. Yep. This one was a major success.
Yes. And my next fact is that Stellan Skarsgård had to sit through almost 8 hours of makeup every day that he was shooting.
Wow. That's crazy.
That is horrendous.
It's about like, I'd have to look into it, but the main one that comes to mind is, I believe her name is Rebecca Romaine. I could be wrong on that, but she played Mystique in the original X-Men films. Mm-hmm. And hers was something crazy like that.
Yeah.
Like just hours and hours of makeup. So, hey, I mean, more power to them, her as well as Stellan Skarsgård. And I'm sure many, many others who have done things of that nature. Mm-hmm. I feel like it usually pays off in the end.
Yeah.
And you can see, like, not to get too off track here, but like when the X-Men kind of did a soft reboot with the X-Men First Class movies and then kind of continued in that continuity with Jennifer Lawrence playing Mystique. She did the first movie and very much committed to doing the makeup the way that Rebecca Romaine did. Mm-hmm. And then because she's a big movie star, was very vocal and complained about the makeup. And so they lessened it every single movie after that. And the quality got significantly worse, in my opinion. So I don't know. I feel like, yes, it's an investment for the actor, and I'm sure it's very arduous, but I'm very much in favor of the practical design, practical makeups or makeup, and as opposed to doing CGI and things of that nature. So, anyways.
So also, I thought this was interesting. A man named David J. Peterson, who created the languages Dothraki and Valyrian for Game of Thrones, also created the Fremen language for this movie.
Really? Mm-hmm. That's cool.
I am so intrigued by that. I think that would be such a task to create a language, because you have to think about, like does the form of like different words change when you use it like in like plural or like masculine, feminine, like that kind of thing. Like it's a big thing. So I'd be interested to see the process of all of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree. I've actually wondered about that quite a bit. Oftentimes I go back to like Lord of the Rings because a lot of people know this, but I don't know that it's like widely known. Mm-hmm. So J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings, Christian, by the way, he actually is the one who witnessed to C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, and J.R.R. Tolkien was the one who convinced him to reconsider, and C.S. Lewis went on a journey and found Christ and wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and they were editing buddies. They both edited each other's novels and so on and so forth. But anyways, J.R.R. Tolkien did not write Lord of the Rings just for the sake of writing it. He created the language. And forgive me, Lord of the Rings fans, because I do not know the name of the language off the top of my head. But he created the language for that universe and then wrote the story around it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which is insane. But I often go back to that, like that example in my mind, just of like, how does one do that? Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's been done many, many times in human history, but there's just a lot that goes into it. Mm-hmm. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I agree. My next fact is that with a lot of the movies that we talk about on this podcast, we'll talk about all the different actors that almost got the role or who were considered for the role, things like that. And that evidently was not the case with Dune. I could find no casting details because the director got his first choice for pretty much every single person that was cast, which is really cool. That does not work out a lot of the time just because of, scheduling conflicts and things like that. But
yeah, that hardly ever happens. Really, the only person that I can think of where that he kind of gets to cherry pick his cast and everybody just says yes is Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are even times for him where it doesn't fully work out. So, yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah. And then my last one is kind of a 2-for-1 because they're both about the person who did the score, which was Hans Zimmer.
Yes, we love Hans Zimmer.
We love him. But he actually ended up for this movie inventing new instruments and also developed his own language for the choral arrangements, making the score like in attempt to make the score sound like it incorporated music, quote unquote, from another world. So I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, that's super cool. And fun fact about Hans, this was like a high on the priority list for him. And so he actually, because Hans works with Christopher Nolan on pretty much every movie. And
I'm going to cut you off because this is my fun fact and you're not stealing another one from me.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So Hans Zimmer had an offer to do the score for Tenet because, as we know, he is, you know, Christopher Nolan and Hans Zimmer are like basically synonymous. Like they work
Two peas in a
on
pod.
everything together.
Yep.
And then Zimmer was offered the chance to score Dune. And he couldn't do both because they were both, you know, around the same time.
Yes.
And believe it or not, Zimmer chose to turn down Tenet. And because he just, I guess he had read the novel Dune and loved it and wanted to be a part of it. And so this is one that he actually did not end up working on Christopher Nolan or with Christopher Nolan on. So
yeah, which I'm glad it worked out the way that it did for two reasons. One, I think the score of both part 1 and part 2 for Dune is fantastic.
Yes.
I very much enjoy it. We as a couple love pretty much anything that Hans Zimmer does. I believe that he very much so is the next John Williams in terms of his legacy and the mark he'll leave on the industry. I feel very strongly about that, actually. But the other reason that I am happy it worked out the way that it did is because the person who worked in place of Hans Zimmer on Tenet was Ludwig Göransson, which I am a massive fan of Ludwig's work. I love him. I don't believe that he necessarily gets the credit that's due to him, but I guarantee most everybody listening has heard his work, as he is the one who did basically all the music, the score for The Mandalorian. So he came up with that theme and everything. He also did Oppenheimer.
Yes, I just saw that online. I was kind of shocked because that's another Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah. He also did Black Panther.
And Wakanda Forever.
Yes, Black Panther 2. He did Creed. He did Creed 2. I mean, he is pretty young. Well, he's 40. So, I mean, that's definitely not old. But in terms of composers, like, he is young. But his list of things he's done already is really fantastic. Like, it's pretty heavy. So I have a lot of respect for him, the work that he's done. So I think for him to be able to get the chance to do Tenet was insane. And then he went on and did Oppenheimer, which if you're not a huge fan of the Tenet score, which I think Tenet is a phenomenal score. That's one of the things that stood out to me about that movie. Then you're definitely a fan of this score of Oppenheimer. That score was fantastic.
Oh yeah.
So I would actually, that's a hill I would die on, that Ludwig Göransson is a phenomenal composer and that he deserves more respect. But anyways, getting back on track here. Yes, I am very glad that it worked out the way that it did. And I believe that Hans did fantastic work here on Dune. And I very much wonder if, I wonder how it played out for Chris. If it was like, hey, Ludwig, you did such a great job on Tenet.
You're do Oppenheimer?
You're my new guy. You get to do Oppenheimer because Hans, he turned me down. I'm done with him, or if it was like, oh, Hans is working on part 2 of Dune now, and I'm working on one of the biggest movies of the century. You want to work on that one too? Or if Hans, I highly doubt Hans turned down Oppenheimer, but
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have never looked into it.
I have to look into that one because I'd be interested to know more. But anyways, yeah. So is that everything that you had? Mm-hmm. Okay. So there was just an absolute cornucopia, for a fun word of the week for this podcast. An absolute cornucopia, treasure trove of information available for the production on this film. So I am very, very much going to condense it and just hit highlights. I'm going to cherry pick. I have a huge list in front of me here of things that I condensed. I had 13 pages worth of notes in Microsoft Word on this.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm hitting the highlights. I really only want to spend a couple minutes on this. So let me sift through some of them because I should have gone through and highlighted the ones that I really wanted to touch on.
Just read all 13 pages.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. No, but I'll start with a little bit of pre-production here. Denis Villeneuve saw adapting Dune as a lifelong dream of his. He was very passionate about the source material, and he ended up securing the role of director after he impressed Legendary Pictures with his vision back in 2017. I didn't really know that this was in the pipeline for that long.
I didn't either.
But anyways, I thought that was very cool. And I've listened to some of his interviews talking about this, and you can tell that he very much is a fan of this and cares about it, which I really appreciate because it does make a big difference. As opposed to a director coming on, learning about it, and putting his kind of spin on it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how most movies are done. There is a difference when someone comes in and is a true fan. So, not to talk about Christopher Nolan again, but he is a fan of the Halo games, and he is fighting hard to get the rights to make films about them. And man, I'd really love to see that. So, not that this is going to reach anybody that matters, but if you're listening, give Chris the rights to Halo. So, anyways, let me see here. Villeneuve originally insisted when talking to Legendary Pictures that the movie had to be at least 2 parts in order to do the book justice, which he did end up getting, but they did not promise it in the beginning.
I did see that, yeah.
Which, I don't know. I mean, it is a big risk. It's a gamble for them. Especially given the history of the franchise, or I guess the IP, not the franchise. But he made it work. He got the second part, and third movie's on the way. So good job to him and everybody else who worked on it. He actually very much intentionally avoided influences from the previous Dune films because he really wanted to craft his own vision directly inspired by the novel. Let's move forward here to some visual effects and practical effects. As we mentioned earlier in the episode, the Villeneuve and company were very set on doing as many things practical as possible. So one thing that I really thought was cool was the ornithopters. I'm probably butchering that, and I really apologize. The dragonfly looking
helicopter things.
Yes, those. They were created as fully functional 11-ton models resembling dragonflies with working interiors and operable doors.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, I believe that. I mean, that's so cool. I believe they were on gimbals. They weren't maybe not. They were 11 tons. I don't think they actually flew though. But I thought that was super, super cool. And people can argue this all day long. You can watch a Marvel movie that's mostly green screen and seems like the actors are acting perfectly fine in it. But I feel like the tactile ability to be in an ornithopter, Ornithopter. I'm working on it, guys. Bear with me.
I like the orthnopter.
I know that's the very wrong pronunciation of the, and I apologize. Ornithopter. There we go. That's what it is. I like knowing that the actors were able to actually have hands-on, and I'm sure that impacted their performance.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, the sandworms, they were not practical, as you stated previously. However, their design was inspired by a real-life animal. Do you have any ideas?
I feel like I read this and I can't remember what it was. Was it something prehistoric?
No. I don't know that you're going to guess it. I would love to hear a wild guess if you have one. All right, time is up. The design was inspired by whales.
I was going to say that, but I was like, no, that's not what it was.
Yeah. Well, they were inspired by whales, and it took over a year for them to perfect just kind of their overall look and movement and things like that. But the movement was also, they took cues from Jaws for the movement of the sandworms. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Filming locations. The desert scenes were filmed in Wadi Rum, Jordan. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I assume I am. And the Liwa Oasis, which is located in the United Arab Emirates, because they really wanted to obviously have a practical set, but also they were really set on having natural lighting for all of the scening, for all the scenes. And I thought that made a big difference in the film. That's one of the major takeaways for me in this movie, is that the film is just absolutely gorgeous. If nothing else, like if there was no dialogue, this film is beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that they went that direction. Another thing that I thought was pretty cool was that they avoided using green screens in the movie, not because they had anything against them, but because they were filming on practical locations. They used what they referred to as sand screens, which were nothing more than just green screens, but they were colored to match the sand.
Gotcha.
So it allowed them to blend their CGI use better with the desert landscape and so on. But I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Why not? But anyways, some of the combat styles for the major factions, which there's really only two that we talk about, which is Harkonnen and Atreides. But the combat styles were inspired by historical techniques, including Greek and Roman warfare.
Interesting.
Looking back, having watched the film, I can totally see that. Like, it's very clear. But let's move on here. Let's see. Costumes. I thought this was interesting. Lady Jessica's costume was influenced by Balenciaga designs. So thought that was cool. Little fun fact. What else we got? The costume designers, Jacqueline West and Bob Morgan, designed over 1,000 unique looks for the costumes. I did
see that. That is crazy.
That's insane. I mean, it's their job. So, they did a very good job, but it just seems like an astounding number. But they took cues from historical periods such as the Middle Ages and Bedouin culture. Very unfamiliar with that. So look it up. Bedouin. I don't know. I have to look into that a little bit. What else we got? Casting decisions. Don't really care about that. I thought this was very cool. So we talked a lot about practical effects. You want to know what something that was done practically that I did not expect? Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Harkonnen, his levitation was practical.
Really?
Yes. So they had some rigs that they built for him. There were a couple different ones. One of the main ones they used was designed kind of like a seesaw. They had some other ones with harnesses and so on and so forth. But They did not use CGI for the effect itself, although they did use CGI to enhance it. And then you did talk about Hans Zimmer. That was the last big thing that I had. So I think I've gotten through all of my my ridiculous list of production details that I have. So I think it's time that we move on. So how would you rate this movie on a scale of 1 to 100? Or would you like me to go first?
I can go.
Okay. All right. And this is part 1, which I feel like it's going to be a little bit hard for us to gauge because we watched part 2 directly after. I mean, it was the next day, but they were very close together.
Yeah.
And we had never seen anything, never knew anything, never read anything about Dune.
Yeah.
So
Went into it completely blind.
Completely blind, other than the fact that this had been very much so talked up by pretty much everybody. Just because I remember I was still working as a respiratory therapist in the hospital. Like everybody was talking about this. Like, hey man, did you go see Dune? No, I didn't. Oh, you got to go watch it. And just a lot of people that I would have never expected were talking about how crazy this movie was.
Right.
Which definitely affected our opinion.
Yeah. People are probably going to hate me for this. And I talk about it some in our interview with Josh, I believe. But I just, it was very well done. Actors, all amazing, obviously. Score, amazing. Sets, amazing. But I really want to be into these kinds of movies.
Yes.
But I just can't get myself to be.
Yes, I know.
So, yeah. And it's the same thing goes for all Star Wars movies I really struggle with. I don't know what it is because I do like dystopian stuff. I do like some science fiction stuff, but it's just a really fine line. So, all that to say, I think I'm going to give this movie an 87.
Okay. I mean, that's still very strong.
It is strong. I wanted to say 85, but I also want to factor in, like I said before, the set work, the acting, the score, even though I don't love just the genre,
yeah.
I can't not give props to all of those different things.
Yes, I agree. I'm actually going to be right there with you. So I'm going to give this movie a 90. Although I would have no problem giving it an 88. And honestly, I would maybe lean that direction a little bit more. I think watching part 2 did affect my score a little bit just because I feel like part 2 is much better.
I agree.
And not to say that they're in different leagues, but it feels a little bit more coherent.
Yeah, I just felt myself more engaged in part 2, I think.
Yes. But I think very much so, like you said, I'm giving it the 90 because it's just a solid movie. I have to give props and acknowledge the work that Denis Villeneuve did on this film. The acting was great. The casting was great. The writing was great. The score was great. The set design, the filming locations, I loved it. The practical effects, fantastic. I just have a lot of love and respect for so many things that they did. Really, more than anything, the only complaint that I have is that, man, I just felt so confused.
Yeah. I do feel like there were certain aspects that they did explain well. I appreciated that they took the time at the beginning to explain quite a few things, but it was just a lot to take in, I think.
Yes, it was very much so a lot to take in. It was, for at least the first half of the movie, it just felt like chaos. And that was hard to just, I won't say get behind, but I just felt so confused. And I'm sure that that's the intent. Like, I don't feel like that's an accident. And I'm sure that for us, like, it felt kind of jarring because we did watch it later at night. You know, we had both worked that day. We had a lot of stuff going on even after work. So, you know, our brains are kind of fried a little bit. Maybe it would have been better if
we had done it on like a Saturday.
Yeah, very possible that would have made a difference. I also think another factor that played into it was just that so many people talked this movie up. I mean, honestly, to unreasonable standards, I feel like for us.
I agree.
It was just so high on a pedestal that to watch it and walk away feeling like, okay, like, hey, this is a great movie, but I don't feel like anything anybody said to us was true.
Yeah.
To walk away feeling like that is like really disappointing. But it reached such a pedestal that it was unattainable.
Yeah. I feel like I just have to, I don't know, if one person comes up to me and tells me, you know, oh my gosh, like you have to watch this movie, it's amazing. Like I take it with a grain of salt just because it's, you know, just one person's opinion.
Right.
But I had so many people tell me how amazing this movie was. So I was just like, my expectations were through the roof. Like I was like, this is going to be like Interstellar level, like, you know, and so it was just very much a letdown in that aspect.
And that's one of those things that like it has to be measured well in terms of perspective, because I'm sure there are some listening right now that are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, for sure.
But also understand from our perspective, like we did not watch this movie until just a few weeks ago. So we had 3 years worth of people like, you haven't seen Dune? And just constantly like, it's so good. And so 3 years of that.
Yeah.
And then going and watching it and being like, okay, like, hey, I have no problem acknowledging that this is a good movie.
Right.
I'm not saying that it's not a good movie. It is. It's solid. Some of the best work I've seen in terms of set design, practical effects. Like, I have so much love for the work that was poured into this movie. But when that's like the standard that's been set for you, it becomes hard to reach. And then, too, I don't think the movie helped itself by us being so confused for so much of it. It was just like, okay, like this is so much to take in that it just felt very jarring.
Yeah.
So
I truly think, because thus far we've only seen it once.
Yes.
I think it's one of these movies where, because like even for me, I feel like, I don't know if I am just dumb or what, but I just like a lot of movies, like specific examples that I can think of are like some of the Star Wars movies and things like that. Like I have to watch a couple times before I can truly appreciate them. Yeah. Because I'm like, I have to kind of get it ingrained in my brain. Like, okay, this is what this universe is like. This is how this works, you know, and that kind of thing. And so I do think if I watched Dune again, I think I would like it better. Yes. Just because I have a better feel for what's going on and I'm able to kind of track a little bit easier, if that makes sense.
No, I agree 100%. I think having watched part 2, like it feels like it's a lot easier to be in that universe, so to speak. Like we kind of have our footing about us a little bit. We understand the background. We understand the characters a little bit more. So yes, going back and watching Dune again would make a big difference. I feel like in our overall experience and our opinion of the movie. But yeah, I don't want any listener to get the wrong opinion. We thought this was a good movie. It just, I don't know, it made us very introspective in the sense that, hey, maybe when we recommend movies to people, our opinion...
We need to dial it back a little bit.
Right, exactly. We should not put them on such a pedestal that it's hard for them to be reached. And like, I certainly did that. And I can think back to like, I did that to my boss one time. I recommended a movie to him so much to finally get him, and he finally watched it. And then he was like, I mean, it was good. But, it's like you recommend something to somebody and you hate to hear that. And it's like, oh, do I have bad taste?
Yeah.
It's like, no, you just talked about it so much that the picture in their mind became something that could not be attained.
Right.
So, anyways, I think we could keep going for a little while, but this episode is going to be like
2 hours long.
Yeah. So we better stop where we're at and allow you guys to enjoy the interview that we had with Josh. So is there anything that you want to add in before we go?
I think I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you guys and enjoy the interview. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, it is time for our guest to arrive on the podcast, and not just any guest, a third-time guest on our show. Yes, it is my brother, Josh Smith, back in the studio. Josh, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Third time's a charm.
Yes, sir. Yes, and today we are talking about none other than Dune, which is actually a movie that we watched because of your recommendation.
That's right.
Yes, we had never seen it before until just the other night. And I got to say, I'm really eager to talk about this with you because we have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, a lot.
we have a lot of thoughts, and we want to get inside your brain. So we're really excited about this. But I guess just to get the ball rolling, how would you rate Dune? Scale of 1 to 100.
Okay. I am probably going to give this a solid 90.
Wow. Okay. And why would you give it a 90?
Well, I have to keep it in perspective of the other reviews I've given, but
Okay.
keeping it totally separate from part 2, the probably most underrated reason to me going into it, not knowing what to expect, was the world that they take you into. Before we get to like the actual characters and the storyline, the cinematography, all the shots that they give you. I mean, the intro grabs you immediately for a couple of different reasons. I'm sure we'll get there, but just watching it visually, it's pretty stunning from start to finish to me.
I will say that was probably one of my immediate thoughts was just when they do the title. There's like the lens flare and the flash and like the words kind of emerge. It's like, wow, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Like that was very captivating. And all it is 4 letters.
Yeah.
You know, like, but it was super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they took some of what could have been simple and, well, is simple, but they made it top notch.
Yeah.
Yes. Overall, that was kind of the feeling that we were left with after the film was over, was that whatever it is relative to a film, so, you know, the directing, the acting, the writing, the scenery, the photography, I guess, the locations, whatever it is, the way that the movie was shot, like everything was done to like top shelf, like the highest of high quality. I felt like this was just I guess to quote Martin Scorsese, this is cinema. Like, yeah, like
it really is.
Yeah, that was just the highest of high quality.
And even throughout, like, the whole thing, I think there were several instances where we just stopped and were like, this looks amazing. Like, it was just done very, very well.
Yes, it was very beautiful, for sure. Okay. Well, very, very nice. That's a strong, solid score.
Yeah.
We should have looked at your other movies before we got going, because we did Gladiator with you.
Yep.
In season 1, and then season 2, was it Batman Begins? Were you on that episode?
Sounds right.
I don't recall, truthfully.
There's so many episodes, so many movies.
Yes, I truthfully don't remember. I think it might have been.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, because we talked about keeping them separate from the trilogy.
Yes.
Yes. Yep, grading it on its own.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Nice.
Good memory.
Yeah, we'll have to go back and look at your scores for that episode.
I know it was definitely lower than Gladiator. That's my favorite movie.
Yes, and Gladiator 2 is coming out.
No comment.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it, but the trailers do look epic.
Yes, they do look good. But yeah, so Dune, if I may.
Yes.
one of the things that's been great to me about this podcast that you both are doing is I think I've said it before. Was never really a big movie person. It's not that I didn't like them. I didn't like the time commitment.
Yeah.
I kind of have, I don't want to sound like that guy, but high standards if I'm going to spend that kind of time. I want to be not only entertained like Gladiator says, but I want it to take me somewhere. And Dune does that pretty good. But, being a part of and listening to this podcast every week, it's helped me understand maybe a little bit more why you guys did it, started it. And for me and my wife, Amanda, it's been nice to every now and again find a new movie that we can enjoy.
Absolutely.
Apart from, a little TV series, which we don't watch a lot of those either.
Right.
But to be able to find a good movie that tells a story is, pretty entertaining for a little bit of your free time.
Yeah.
Any given moment. So
absolutely.
I definitely appreciate you guys locking us in on that, and it's been very nice. And Dune was one of the things I wanted to make sure I say was one of those nights we were like, hey, let's try and find a movie.
Yeah.
And because of my standards in a lot of different ways, I can spend 30 minutes trying to find one, and we're like, okay, well, we're not going to find a movie tonight.
Yeah.
And we move on.
Yes.
So I saw this one pop up on Hulu. I think it was actually through Max because they carry that through there.
Yeah.
But it was on the Hulu platform, and it popped right up, and immediately they like most movies do nowadays, they just start showing all the heads of the actors and actresses.
Yep.
And obviously Dune came apart, and you could tell immediately sci-fi, otherworldly. But the first reason I was like, okay, let's look into it was because I saw Oscar Isaac, I saw Timothée Chalamet, I saw Zendaya, I saw Stellan Skarsgård, I saw Jason Momoa, and I'm like, okay, I'm not a movie buff, I would never say that, but I've seen enough now that I can identify 6-7 people in this movie right away and reference other works.
Yes. Josh Brolin, Javier Bardem. I mean, you're just scratching the surface. It is a star-studded cast through and through. Dave Bautista. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many people, and for me, knowing that I've seen them give compelling performances in other movies, other genres, okay, it's probably going to check the acting box.
Right, yep.
Now let's look at the, like you said, the writing of it, the story, and I went into it not knowing anything.
Yep, so same here.
The other funny tidbit is, because I always do a quick search to look the content of the movie, where does it lie in key areas, and then also a little bit of a backstory. So I found out this was based off a book.
Yes.
But then probably another silly reason why I clicked onto it was because YouTube recommended a quick scene from I think it was 1984, but the first
original
Dune movie adaptation in the 80s. And I'm like, wow, this is sci-fi. It's probably going to look pretty terrible.
Yes.
And they showed me Patrick Stewart, who played in that movie the part of Gurney Halleck, and he was doing the weapons training scene.
Yes.
And it was just awful CGI.
Yes, they look like they're in neon cardboard boxes for their shielding. It's so weird.
Yeah, but to me, I was like, my first lens is Professor X.
Yes,
but obviously very young Patrick Stewart. I have no idea what this movie's about. I didn't even know what that scene was, but I was like, well, okay, it has to be better than that. And I haven't seen it, so forgive me if you like the 80s version. I haven't seen it. It's probably fine. But I was like, this is a new adaptation. It's probably going to be pretty stellar. And just seeing faces I knew drew me in, on top of it being something totally unexpected. I went into it not knowing anything more than it was a sci-fi futuristic world.
Right.
Yeah.
And I pushed play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that everything that you spoke to is very true of us.
Right.
I mean, I knew a lot of things going into it strictly through a cultural standpoint, just seeing memes from the movie or screen captures or there's a Lego set that's come out since it. So I knew enough to know, have a general idea, but I really truly didn't know anything. I didn't know about Arrakis or any of the different houses or, the only thing I knew was that there was an episode of Chuck where Morgan dresses up as the sandworm from Dune. That's really the extent of it. I didn't know anything about the hierarchy or the universe that it's set in or the emperor, very little background. And you knew nothing about it, right?
I mean, we were pretty late hopping onto the bandwagon because when did this come out? 2019?
think it might have been 2021.
Okay, that sounds right.
Yes, you're right.
So I had heard like bits and pieces from lots of different people who had recommended it to us, especially after we started this podcast. Like lots of people were just like, "Oh, well, one movie you should cover is Dune."
Yeah, this is probably our most requested movie to be covered.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean it was just constant, especially when part 2 came out.
Yeah.
Because it started coming up again, but even before part 2 came out, it was just everybody, whether it was at church or friends or whatever, it was, hey, when are you guys going to do Dune? Like, okay, we will at some point. I will say there was a small part of me that was maybe a little nonconformist, like, I'm not doing Dune. Everybody else is watching it. I'm not doing it. But just very, very small, like very small. But I will say there was a little bit of that in me. But anyways, we also have a lot of movies that we like that we've been trying to work through.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So anyways, yeah, we went into it knowing very little. And I think probably one of the coolest things about it is that it throws you right in right away. It doesn't take any time at all actually to explain anything, which is maybe why it felt so jarring for us, because it definitely was very jarring. It felt like the first half hour to hour of the movie, at least for me, experientially, was just chaos.
Yeah.
I was just like, what is going on? Like, I really enjoyed that they give you moments where you kind of learn more about the backstory, like small moments, like when Paul is with his dad, and because his dad is at his grandfather's grave, and he used to fight bulls, and like just kind of a small moment that overall it doesn't contribute to any like major parts of the film, but like it's a nice moment to spend with characters, but also it helps you understand the world that they live in and kind of background about them and their life. And I thought that was really good. But yeah, it was, I don't know, it took us for a trip, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That first hour was a lot to soak in just from all the language, the titles of things. They're obviously not, we're not saying the house of John and Sally. It's like, a lot of different words that we don't normally hear, of course, being sci-fi. And
that definitely, and that contribute to the overall understanding of the film. It's like at some point we decided to turn on subtitles because it was like, I'm pretty sure they're saying just like some name that we don't recognize, but they might just be talking quietly. Like I can't tell for sure, but you got words like Atreides, like that. We don't say that. We don't recognize it in conversation naturally until we learn it, Exactly. So anyways, continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say that once you get past that point and you're further into the movie, you kind of don't focus on that as much because the storyline it's not super complicated once you figure out the players on the chessboard.
Right.
In my opinion, it just is like, whoa, these are new pieces. You're not playing with the knight and the rook and the queen.
Right.
It's,
You
again,
got the Baron.
Different titles. Yes, exactly. The Baron and the houses and the Sardaukar and the Fremen and all these different things that are just different groups of people that make up this whole, futuristic sci-fi world.
Yes. And if I can get us on just a little rabbit trail for a moment. So the scene where after like the invasion of Arrakis has happened and Paul's dad, what is his name?
Duke Leto.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yes. So he's been like paralyzed and he's in that chair and they're in the room, like the Baron is there and like his posse and they're all there.
Yeah.
And he's just eating. He's like, oh, you have a good chef, cousin, like all that stuff. The scene where they do the close up of Oscar Isaac, like leaning in the chair, paralyzed.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Baron like slowly floats into frame.
We lost it.
We laughed so hard.
Well, I laughed too. It's pretty funny that he's obviously overweight from being House Harkonnen's ruler and very heavy, but I just laugh because he uses some sort of anti-gravity technology to slowly float over towards them.
Yeah.
It's a little cheesy when you consider the rest of the context of the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
They cloak him in all the black, and you can't really
Yes.
tell. He looks like he's 5 stories tall and
Yes.
all that stuff. And
Right.
then he gets the poison tooth surprise treatment.
Yes. No, but that was just one moment when it definitely wasn't supposed to be funny, and I don't feel like it took away from the film.
Yeah.
But just like you said, he's wearing all these prosthetics. Stellan Skarsgård is not fat. He's this massive guy.
Yeah.
And just the way he floated into frame, it killed me. I looked over at Emily. I was like, "Look at that big fat floating fatty." Or something. Anyways, sorry, I kind of got us off there, but I just wanted to touch on that because that cracked us up.
Yeah.
But okay, well, why don't we pause for a moment on our discussion and let's do our trivia. We
Sounds
always
good.
have a few trivia questions for our guests, and I believe we have 5. Is that right?
Yep.
All right, we have 5 for you this time. So, Em, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Okay, first one. At the beginning of the movie, what year does it say it is?
I have no idea.
It is
Do you have a
Do you have a
guess?
Does it start with a 2?
No.
That's way beyond that, isn't it?
10,191.
I thought it was way, way distant future. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Now, next question. What is the device called that was used to send rhythmic vibrations into the sand to fool the sandworms?
Oh, the physical thing that they plant.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss that one too.
It's also, if you've seen Bambi, the name of a character in there.
Sorry, my kids have not watched Bambi yet. It's another one I didn't watch growing up. Yeah, you got me on that one too.
The Thumper.
Thumper.
Yes.
Next one is, who created the score for this movie?
Oh, that's another great question.
I'm betting you could guess it.
Yeah, I don't be so sure. Honestly, I could probably only name the director, Villanueva guy.
Yeah, Dennis.
Dennis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just think of some...
It's okay if you
Trivia is the worst part for me on this podcast. I always score terribly.
He works with Christopher Nolan a lot. Does that help?
It should, but it does not.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Hans Zimmer.
Hans Zimmer, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The big one, at least in today's production. John Williams is probably the great, but I don't know that. I feel like he's slowing down maybe
Yeah.
on work. He's getting up there in age. All right, next question. When Paul was alone in his room, what was sent through a small hatch over his bed meant to kill him?
Was it some sort of so futuristic, I don't know how to label it, but it's resembled a bee or
Yes. Yep.
some sort of insect like that. It was a kind of like a
Yep.
robotic technology type thing
Yes.
that they sent through the
Yep.
door.
Yep.
Yeah.
It had a specific name.
Of course it did.
No, but you're right. You're right.
You
That's what
are
it
right.
was.
Yes.
Yeah. I know exactly what scene you're talking about. I don't know that I can recall the specific name of the device, though.
A hunter seeker.
Hunter Seeker, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I might mispronounce this. Is it Fremen? Is that how you say it? Fremen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fremen.
The Fremen.
Fremen.
Yeah.
What do the Fremen do to avoid attracting sandworms?
Call it the Sandwalk.
Yes.
Yes.
Good
Ding,
job.
ding, ding.
Had to get one.
First one right. Nice. Okay. Well, we're through that anyways. You don't have to worry about any more questions.
Okay, good.
All right. So we can just open this up. If you want to do any, like your favorite scenes or anything like that, feel free. Take the conversation whichever direction you want. I will say, as soon as this movie was over, Emily and I were like, I don't get it.
Oh, perfect.
That's how we felt. And we get it, but
I think for me personally, it was just like everybody who would talk to me about this movie be like, oh my gosh, like it is so good, and like would really overhype it.
Yes.
And so I went into it with these grand expectations,
Yeah.
And also it probably didn't help that I just really don't like sci-fi
Yeah.
movies much. Like I can't get into Star Wars. Like I can't, so I think that's part of it too. But I felt a little let down at the end.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that's fair. Sci-fi is not your favorite genre, but I love sci-fi.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I understand the story. I understand which direction it was going and things like that. But that's probably true of myself as well. The movie kind of got placed on a pedestal just because of how constant it was. Like, when are you going to cover Dune? You got to cover Dune and stuff like that. And I get it. By the end of the movie, I very much felt like what we already expressed is true. The idea that wow, this is really, really high quality. This is done insanely well. But even our brother Jake, he was somebody who said something about this movie, and Jake's not somebody who watches a lot of movies.
Yeah.
And he was like, that was maybe one of the best, in terms of well done movies.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like you said earlier. I think this is probably one of the only movies I've ever pushed you guys on.
Yeah.
And not just because of the podcast, but it was I'd never heard of it, had no expectations, went into it, and regardless of my trivia score, I'm gonna give you my brief overview so the audience can be rest assured that I have seen it.
Yes,
And
please.
the reason why I like it, and I think maybe other people like it too, is to me, sometimes maybe it's the idea of escapism, but really, it's cool to just pretend like when we were children, you play make believe, things like that. This is obviously very futuristic idea of a world,
Right.
and they immerse you in it.
Right.
So to me, there's so many pieces at play here that at a 10,000 foot view, my first grasp of it is honestly not too dissimilar from our world, not to get political, but the idea of spice is dual functioning. One is it's the only way for interstellar travel, which when you're in the year 10,000 plus,
Right.
and you got all these planets,
Right.
you need to be able to travel. But the other thing, and what's big with Paul's character and obviously the Fremen, is it's this, psychedelic hallucinogen.
Right.
And one of the themes, and if you pay attention to the very first thing we see on screen, if I recall, is dreams are from the deep.
Yes.
That text is on the screen and you hear all these weird sounds and whatnot.
Yes.
And throughout the movie, Paul has these visions. So
Right.
you're going to cover a lot of ground here quickly, but this idea that there's an emperor who's in charge of everything.
Right.
Then you have these houses who are underneath who
Right.
have their roles. In this case, Atreides and Harkonnen.
Yep.
And at the time, Harkonnen was in charge of the planet that had the spice and all the spice production. And they say that he who controls the spice controls the world because you need it for travel.
Right.
And apparently one of the ironic things about the movie is they rely on those hallucinations to be able to understand where they should travel.
Yeah.
Because they haven't figured that out yet, I guess.
Okay.
And that's why they used, I can't remember the name, but the guy, the Minute, I think, or something like that. But he's literally like a super computer.
Yes,
So his
yes,
eyes
yes,
roll
yes.
up and he's doing the calculations because while they love technology, apparently they don't like computers.
Right.
So he's doing the math, and so it's centered around spice. Well, Duke, Paul's father, Leto, he's a very popular figure, rising to power, one of the good guys.
Right.
The emperor doesn't like that, feels threatened by the power that he's potentially gaining. So that's where that early decree comes, where it's like, hey, we want you to go over and be in charge of spice production, harvesting, etc.
Right.
So he takes Harkonnen off, basically, but places the House Atreides on there, and he goes in differently. That's where we meet Stilgar, who's like the leader of the Fremen, and his daughter is Chani. That's Zendaya's character.
Yeah.
And Paul has visions of her throughout, but we learn through the visions, once he's exposed to spice, he's very sensitive to it. And throughout the course of the movie, kind of jumping around, but Paul learns that his visions aren't set in stone.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
One example is kind of towards the end of part one, when they finally get to the Fremen, when his mom and him are on the run, he had that vision of the battle
Right.
And he
Yes.
kept trying to get him to yield, but that's not how they did it. It had to be to the death.
Yep.
Because his vision said that this guy was going to be his friend.
Yes. Yep.
And that was when, among other visions, that's a quick example of him learning as a character is like, okay, I'm having these visions, but they're not concrete, set in stone.
Right.
And the biggest one towards the end, where I think part 3 will go, is this whole galactic civil war bloodbath of, this holy war. Because Paul is also this, quote, messianic figure, and his mom is an acolyte of the Bene Gesserit, and you're already confused because you're hearing all these words. But once you watch it once, if you're paying attention, it's pretty easy to digest, in my opinion.
Yeah.
If you got the kind of the names down. And so jumping back to the beginning, he gets tested because the prophecy that the Bene Gesserit, from my understanding, they kind of planted this idea in this story that this figure would come by and change kind of the world order. But it was supposed to be through the birth of a daughter. Well, Paul's obviously a son.
Right.
But once he starts having these visions, that's when this, I can't remember her name, but she's the one that has she's one of the higher up Bene Gesserit, I guess.
Yeah.
They come.
His grandmother.
His grandmother, that's
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Puts the hand in the box
witch.
to test him. And
Yes.
another great thing that I like about the movie is his mom was training him in the ways. We learn about the voice.
Yep.
And it's all a work in practice. But one of the things that got him through that was she always told him that fear is the mind killer.
Yes.
Which, if you pull that out on its own, I think is very true. There's a lot of truth there. And he kept telling himself that to get through it because even though his hand was just in a box, obviously very intense pain. And if you can't pass the test, like his grandmother was going to kill him.
Right.
So, anyways, once they get to the Fremen and the whole idea is those people and Jason Momoa character, Duncan Idaho, who's one of the best warriors, he's already telling them like there's a certain section of people here that already believe that you are going to fulfill this prophecy.
Yeah.
Which more or less is just basically him saving them because the Harkonnen were the Fremen's oppressors.
Yeah.
So now when House Atreides comes in, they believe that they're going to be the oppressors. Duke later was like, well, I want to change things. We want to work together because it's obviously a very barren desert planet and it's way different than where they come from. So we meet the doctor who's trying to turn it into, terraform it into a green space and produce water and all that stuff.
Yep.
And the gist of it is basically Paul character is supposed to come through start to finish from being this kid to being this messianic figure and free the Fremen who are kind of outsiders. They're obviously the home people of the land, and it's all centered around spice. And so there's this power struggle. So that's when the Emperor sends in the Harkonnen to basically double back on the deal with the Atreides, sneak attack him with his special warriors, the Sardaukar, and his nephew, Dave Bautista.
Yes.
Beast, I think is his name. He's put in charge of basically taking it over. So long story short, it ends up the vision of Chani, this Zendaya character.
Yeah.
He keeps having the visions, but it's like, oh, are they going to be a love interest or is she going to kill him? You keep seeing kind of the back and forth. How's it going to be?
Yeah.
And at first she's like not impressed with him at all. And that's kind of the idea of the story is like, I think Paul is going to get to decide in some way how he's going to be this figure that there's a lot of pressure. A lot of people believe that he's going to be the one. I think they make it pretty clear that he's not so sure. And also, like I said earlier, by the way, the prophecy is supposed to be a daughter, not a son. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting how it's all getting set up in the movie. But it's really an emperor trying to downcut someone else who's rising in popularity because he wants to be the one that stays on the throne, so to speak. And he uses another house who he discards at first from the planet to bring them back and go to war with them.
Yes.
And the whole thing about surviving once you're on the planet is sandwalk, the sandworms.
Yeah.
And obviously, in some way, surviving just the exposure to spice.
Right. Yeah.
So basically, they accept Paul once he wins the battle, and it sets up part 2.
Yeah.
So I think part 1 really serves as this really in-depth, but also more of an overview of this world that, is Dune and the basis of it. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Because when we were done watching it, we were like, okay, we need to get inside Josh's brain to find out why he said this movie was fantastic. Because for us, I thought like we both liked it, but it didn't leave us feeling like it was what everyone had said it was to us. Mm-hmm. Not to say that it was bad. Like I like immediately after I was like, I want to watch part 2.
Yeah.
And I want to watch the first one again. Like,
right.
I want to know more and I want to understand. And I really enjoyed it. And the world building was fantastic, but it didn't feel like it hit the mark for what everybody was telling us. So, anyways, man, maybe that's on us. I don't know, but it was fantastic. I thought the cinematography was phenomenal. One of my favorite shots in the movie is the opening scene where the Emperor sends his guys down to talk to Leto, and like just that whole like the armies are present, and but like you've got the ocean and the greenery and everything. Like it's just really pretty.
Yeah,
and that's true of the whole movie. But I don't know. I'm interested to keep digging into this universe, and maybe that's why it's a good film. Like, it gets you hooked.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's a combination, like you said, of visually how the movie comes across, all the great acting that's in it, and it's just a very in-depth universe. It's not very, surface level. There's a lot going on. And I think one of the key threads that doesn't seem like a key thread in part 1 is this idea of the Bene Gesserit, because they're also working with the Emperor.
Yes.
In way they're kind of put off as like the neutral third party, where it's like, oh, they're, maybe how we would view it as like this religious section,
right?
This group of people, and this is just what they do. But I think they're really getting at this idea that they've planted this story over all these years,
yeah,
to move the world in the way that they want to move, much like the Emperor was trying to downfall Atreides because getting too powerful, too popular. It's like, oh, I want to be the most powerful, most popular,
Yeah.
And so they move their chess pieces how they see fit. And Paul's at the center of it all, because obviously once the Baron Harkonnen takes him out, it's like Paul has to now rise to lead their people while also simultaneously befriending the Fremen.
Yes.
While also understanding this whole new planet they've been kind of dumped and put into.
Yes.
And there's just a lot going on. But I think in the end, and obviously part 2 pushes it even further into where it's headed, is him seeking revenge, for his father being killed, which is why they have that moment at the grandfather's grave. And you kind of learn that he's trying to be Oscar Isaac's character, a proper leader for his people. Which is why he goes in with good terms and the Fremen, unlike how Harkonnen did. They just, oppressed him. And that's why the Fremen are also skeptical of, the House Atreides and Paul and Jessica, I think was his mom's name.
Yes.
Because at that point, it's just the two of them, and everybody else that's come to rule the planet has been oppressing to them. But they're trying to learn the ways of the Fremen, especially because of those visions he keeps seeing Chani, and there she is once they meet this group of Fremen at the end. And he's got a lot of questions, and obviously there's that dynamic between mother-son and this whole prophecy and this and that, and it's like, where's it going to head? But I think he's going to continue to wrestle with, how do I be a peaceful leader like my father was, try to do the right thing, but I'm also super upset that my dad was killed.
Right. Yeah.
And then now Harkonnen is obviously, it's kind of Atreides versus Harkonnen. But the dynamic is you also have the Bene Gesserit through in the background, kind of pulling strings, but you also have the Emperor who can just, drop the gavel and say, oh, this is what we're doing. So it's kind of a breaking of the current society in the way that it's supposed to be. And I think that's, a simple way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. Very cool. Well, I have to say, like, as I'm thinking back on the movie, I know I've spoke a lot to the cinematography and how beautiful it is and things like that. I'm trying to think through some of like my favorite scenes or what stuck out to me. And I think there's really only 2 that come to mind. I thought the one I've already touched on a little bit. I thought the scene where Leto and Paul are in the graveyard, I guess. That scene is maybe one of the best in the entire film. Especially the dialogue, the exchange there, where you really do learn that Leto he is a good father to his son.
Yes.
Like I appreciate kind of the commentary that he's talking about, like when Leto's talking about his father and talking about how he was trying to prepare him to be a leader and that he like didn't really want to be either, just like Paul doesn't want to be. And, you know, his dad told him that a good leader never seeks it out.
Exactly.
And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. But then what he tells Paul, I just really appreciate. I thought it was a cool scene where he tells him, you know, and if you choose to still not take leadership after knowing this, you'll still be all that I ever needed you to be. And Paul's like, what's that? And he said, my son.
My son. Yeah.
I was like, okay, that, you know, like that's fantastic. That you get to see it play out throughout the film that he's a good father and a good leader. And like, he almost reminds me, I guess, in some sense, a little bit of Russell Crowe's character in Gladiator. Just the reluctancy to lead, but still leads, and that he's a family man, and that he's interested in the good of the people, not anything else.
That's a great point. It could be a subconscious reason why I like it, because obviously stated that Gladiator is one of my favorites, and that's true.
Yeah.
Like he gets thrust into it, his dad dies, new planet, visions, being put to the test,
Right.
and his mother's like, hey, you have to do this test thing, and it's very painful, and you could die if you don't pass. Like, it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And but all through it, he's trying to understand before he acts. He's trying to kind of see it from all sides and do what's best for his people.
Yeah.
And you know, then you get, it's not a twist in the movie sense, but the twist for his character is, okay, now his dad did die.
Right.
Now he also has to grapple with those anger, sadness emotions of, now he's got this part of him that wants to avenge it, and which means he's got to go against another group of people, which obviously undermines his whole philosophy of just trying to be a good, peaceful leader, at least for his own people. But again, you can't, when another house is attacking you, can't really stop it. And that's another one of my favorite scenes to piggyback off that idea is Josh Brolin's character, Gurney Halleck, when they just do that brief sword fighting, because they wear the energy shields, which stops, you know, fast items, so that's why guns aren't in it. And they opt for hand-to-hand combat because when you're that close, you don't have to move fast with a sword if you get the jump on them, so to speak.
Right.
And Paul was reluctant to train then, you know, and he was telling him, he's like, listen, you're at any moment, your life may depend on it, and you have to fight that way. And he's put in those positions, it's a bit of foreshadowing, but he's put in those positions throughout the movie, especially with the framing at the end, because it was to the death, and they was skeptical of Paul, and it's like, well, okay. And same with the Gladiator. Like, he got thrown into the arena.
Yep.
And, you know, at first he throws the sword down and, you know, he doesn't want to.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
But at a certain point, he realizes there could be a purpose through it. And while he doesn't enjoy the fighting or having to take a life, he sees the purpose in trying to fight for what's right and kind of see that through.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. The other scene that I really liked was when Paul and his mom, Jessica, are running through the desert. It's at night.
Yeah.
And the sandworm is coming to attack them, basically, because they're running on the sand. They're not doing sand walk or anything. And then the sandworm, like, breaches. He breaks the sand, and he stops. And, like, maybe it's just me. I'd have to go back and rewatch. But when the sandworm breaches, the thumper is not going off at that point.
Right.
Not that I recall. It starts after that, and the sandworm diverts and everything. But the sandworm stops, and it looks at Paul, and curiously looks at him. It like turns its head.
Yep.
That moment for me, it felt like everything slowed down and it stopped. And it was like, okay, what man is this that even the sandworms recognize him, you know, and obey him? Like, he wasn't commanding them or anything, but it was like out of respect that it stopped. Yeah. And trying to figure out who is this? What is he?
And in the grand scheme of things, he wasn't there for that long. You know, I mean, we're not told how much time elapses from when they land.
Right.
With another thing I love, the dragonflies.
Yes.
Helicopters. First time I saw that, I was like, oh, really a simple but great, like, change to just, you know, futuristic idea of a helicopter. Very cool.
Right.
But it's that way when he walks through the people. Like I said earlier, there's a section of people that believe what they've been told through this prophecy, And that picture of the sandworm coming up is a great slowdown point, like you said, but they're directing you to understand that they want you to believe that he is who they're saying he is.
Right.
I have my reservations. And they do a good job throughout it, both with his own internal questioning and just, again, the idea that it's supposed to be a daughter. You know, I think the jury's still out on that one. But that's what a great movie does, is they're not intentionally trying to play both sides just to keep you like, oh, it could be this, it could be that. But like, there's different perspectives. And in that perspective, the sandworm, instead of just gobbling them up and, okay, scroll credits, it's like, let's pause.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very true. I'm eager to find out just more about him, more about the story. Especially because I learned after the fact that some of Anakin Skywalker's character is based off of Paul.
Yeah, there's a lot of Star Wars themes, especially if you've watched more modern shows or movies like that. Like, sandworms in particular, to me, is like the whole sand thing. It's very Star Wars-esque to me.
Yes.
And, you know, I think a lot of these themes we're talking about carry through these new movies. I think the stories are pretty much the same.
Yes.
It's just a different world, different labels, a little twist here or there, another wrinkle, another character.
Right.
But I think when you combine it all, you know, you could see similarities between the two for sure.
Yes. Well, specifically, now I don't know this to be true, but my understanding.
Yeah.
And then like, hey, I'm going to turn to the dark side and I'm going to kill a bunch of people. And I'm going to be this really evil dude. I believe that was based off of Paul out of Dune. So I don't know that to be true. So, but
the book's wasn't the book in the 50s or something?
Yeah,
I think
something like that.
It's pretty old, so I mean, it's possible.
So I'm eager to find out if Paul, like, you know, in part 3, because I think part 3 is Dune Messiah is what it's.
Yes, that's the working title.
Yeah,
might be official at this point, but yeah.
Yeah. So I'm eager to see if he, you know, we're going to watch part 2 probably shortly after we're done recording here. So we'll find out what happens there, but I'm eager to find out if Paul is going to turn to the dark side and, you know, maybe he really isn't the Messiah. And
yeah, I will say I prefer part 1 over part 2.
Really?
Which is interesting.
I was gonna ask.
It's interesting. Yeah, I won't talk too much time there since you haven't seen it, and this is about part 1, but it moves the story forward as you would expect. You get more information, which is great, especially on the Bene Gesserit and his mom Jessica.
Yeah.
You get more details of that filled in, because again, to me, they're there, but then they're gone. But there's that thread right from the beginning about these dreams that Paul is seeing, prophecies, and all this stuff that's thrust upon him. And it's not bad. I didn't prefer it, and you could probably, once you see it, probably from my perspective, understand why.
Okay.
But it's definitely worth a watch. Obviously, you're invested. You've seen part 1.
Yes.
But yeah.
Well, I'm very eager to watch it now because almost everybody that has recommended Dune to us has said that they preferred part 2 over part 1.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like even the Rotten Tomatoes scores are higher on part 2 than part 1 as well.
Yeah.
And I want to try and manage my expectations anyways, because I don't want to feel like it's on a pedestal that doesn't get reached. However, like I heard from like online sources, obviously a lot of things get blown out of proportion online, but people were comparing Austin Butler's villain to Heath Ledger's Joker.
I could see that totally.
Wow.
Really?
Okay. Well, now I'm very eager to check
It's
it
very
out.
much like who they wrote him to be as a character. He's like the perfect imprint of that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now we have to watch it. I mean, we're going to anyways, but wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, that leads me to a question for you.
Okay.
You've touched on it multiple times. My question is, how long did it take you to watch this movie after I recommended it? Because I feel like I had to say it like 3 or 4 times.
I mean,
we just watched it last night for the first time.
yeah, at the time of recording this, yes, we watched it last night. So you recommend it. When did you watch it? Because I think you recommended it to us right after you watched it.
It had to be at least a year.
Yeah.
Because I think I picked up steam on the streaming services because they knew part 2 was coming. And to be
Yeah.
honest with you, I didn't even recognize that it was a part 1 till
Yeah.
kind of the beginning. I don't know
Yeah,
if
yeah.
they put it on. I think they put it on the title, but
They do.
They
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So
They do now. They
Yeah.
didn't originally.
yeah. So I can't remember if it was or not, but obviously that's a modern trend. There's a lot of movies. I mean,
Right.
we've kept up with the Fast and Furious movies, and even that did it. It's like, oh, we're going to
Disgusting.
stop it here. Yeah. So I think it had been at least a year.
I think it may have been 2.
That
I
wouldn't
think
surprise
it may
me.
have been. Yeah.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
surprise me. Well,
Maybe 3.
yeah. Well, I just asked because it's like, you know, I don't usually hype things, and I agree with you. Like, and I feel like people shouldn't, whether it's music, movies,
Yeah.
a restaurant, even. Like, if you haven't experienced it and you have someone you trust in your life, family member, friend, what have you, coworker,
Yeah.
and they're recommending something, but it's more of a hype element, probably going to not meet your expectations because as
Right.
humans, we're like,
Yeah.
we're very expectation based. And you should go into a lot of things with no expectations, which is what leads to
Yes.
pleasant surprises.
Yes.
And you know, sorry, I did hype this a little bit, but I was like,
it's okay.
I was
it's
like,
all right.
you know, like we talked, my big thing for this movie is it took me someplace else. And I'm not
Yeah.
the biggest Star Wars fan, not by a long shot, but I feel like, you know, that cult following that it has, well, more than
Yes.
cult following, but
Yeah.
the cultural phenomenon that was back in the time and followed through all those decades, that's probably what the same thing that was going on. It was like, wow, this is so futuristic, planetary out in galaxy, things like that. And people had never seen this idea. Obviously it's not real.
Right.
And they like, and for me, it was like, this is very different. And my brain is usually always engaged. And I'm like, okay, I got Harkonnen, what? You know, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I got to keep up with all these names and characters and places and ideas and then learn kind of where they're all heading.
Yeah.
So that's why I hyped it. Apologies. But
No, it's okay.
I do think, you know, we should probably not do that as a general people. Like, don't
Yeah,
hype
yeah.
something up because if you do, it's probably not going to meet those expectations.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer for the people, you know, like you're like, wow, I don't understand. Everybody's saying it's so great. And it's not, you guys said, you know, you like it, excellent movie.
Right. Yeah.
But it's always going to fall a little bit short, at least of where everyone else is just like, you got to watch it. You got to watch it.
Yeah, and I'm actually guilty of that. I highly recommended a movie to my boss, and he finally watched it, and he was like, "Yeah, I mean, it was good, man." But like, he's like, "I felt like it was like kind of slow. It took me a while to get invested." He's like, "Don't get me wrong, it was good," but I was like, "Oh man, I talked it way up, like way
Yeah.
too much,"
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, all right. Did you have another question? I thought you said you had a couple, but if not, it's
No,
okay.
He just said one, I think.
We'll play the
Maybe
tape
not.
back and we'll find out.
Yeah. What did you guys think of the Bene Gesserit?
I don't know. I don't feel like I can trust him.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
kind of
I
how
would
I
agree.
feel.
Yeah, I feel the same way too. To me, it was like a very, very dark element in terms of like, obviously like it was a dark room they're kind of into. It was in the middle of the night. It was right before they left for the testing where Paul and his grandmother.
Yeah.
I'm just like, they're wearing the weird garb. I'm like,
Leto referred to him as a witch.
yes, yeah, and he was very distrusting, even though his wife Jessica, like I said,
Yes.
was a follower and kind of a practicer, and was also teaching Paul these things, which end up paying off. Like when they get captured in the helicopter,
Yeah.
he has to struggle the way they knew that she knew the voice. So I believe they duct tape her, but they
Yes.
muzzle her, but not him. And then he ends up having to kind of work it out and ends up, you know, controlling them through it to get out of that situation. But I feel like, you know, I can't remember, but there's definitely some Star Wars show or something where they have a very similar type of thing where there's women in like red dresses and garb and they're
Yes.
prophetic, and I don't know which one that was, but that struck a very eerie similarity to the Star Wars that we've been
Yeah.
talking about as well.
The sisters
Yeah.
of something. I can't remember now.
Yeah.
I think it was in Ahsoka. That
I think it was Ahsoka, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. But that's the vibe I get. It's like, very interesting because I see a political thread for them where they're kind of maneuvering for their own purposes. And my big question is, was this whole prophecy thing, it's something that I personally believe that they planted, and I'm still
Right.
trying to figure out why, because the Emperor clearly controls the houses and who was running Spice, which
Yeah.
they show you in this movie. And I'm also trying to figure out how Paul is going to disrupt all of that potentially.
I mean, they kind of say that they did plant it, right? When they're talking about the idea of meticulously crossing bloodlines and stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Like they've planned this and that's why this testing is so serious.
Right.
But to me, and maybe I'm just misremembering, but I don't think they outright say what their purposes are.
No, they
No,
don't.
I don't.
And that's the
No.
piece that I'm referring to. I'm trying to figure out why, especially when you talk about like a grandmother testing her son and literally saying like,
Yep.
if you can't pass, you're
I'm gonna
gone.
kill
You're gonna
you.
die.
It's like, whoa.
Yep.
So it's pretty intense. But to me, it's very interesting to see where it's all going to head. And me seeing part 2 and you guys haven't, it obviously takes another big step forward in a lot of these characters. But I think we've already learned more about what will happen in part 1 through a lot of these visions. But like I said, with the whole part that they're not set in stone and Paul has a choice, like the Fremen battle, where it's like, that vision was we were going to be friends. And that's why he tried to get him to yield, and it didn't end up happening. And he knew at some point he couldn't allow it to happen that way as much as he didn't want it to go down like that. So it's very interesting. And I think more so than anything, the elements of the acting that we started with, the visual stunningness of the movie start to finish.
Yes.
Just the kind of left field character ideas and how they're all presented. To me, it all adds up as like a whole different world.
Yes.
And not to reference Gladiator again, but it's the same way. Like that's very true historical. And it's like, okay, there's arena, this empire, all this stuff. But it's hard for us in modern day to vision that actually happening.
Yes.
This is like way beyond that because interstellar travel and spice,
Right.
and all these things. The Baron Harkonnen healed himself from that critical poison tooth thing by sitting in some
Like
to me
tar.
like a tar bathtub. It's like, okay, that's not going to happen. But
Right.
in this world it does.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
all in all, I think if you haven't seen it, go watch it. If you don't like sci-fi, I'm not the biggest sci-fi fan either, Emily, but I like being taken to, kind of a different world.
Yes.
So I think give it a chance. Maybe you don't love it. That's okay. There's a lot of movies I don't like that other people like too. But if you're into, great acting, great storytelling, and you can commit the time to it, it's a good watch.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to throw in before we close it out?
I think we covered it.
All right. Well, Josh, thank you for joining us on the podcast again. It has been a lot of fun. You have been a 3-time guest, one of 2 up to this point. And I think we'll have a third one join the club. However, as of right now, it is just you and Jordan Bewley. So thank you for being a faithful listener. Thank you for being a faithful supporter and a faithful guest as well on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me again.
Yes, of course.
All right. Well, that concludes our episode for Dune. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you again to Josh for joining us in the studio.
Yes. Thank you, bro. It was a lot of fun having you back in the studio. It was a lot of fun doing this episode. It's just, anytime we have a guest in the studio, it's a lot of fun, but especially when it's a new movie to us.
Yeah, for sure.
So we hope you guys enjoyed. And we hope you'll join us again next week.
Yes, we will be covering the Muppets movie.
Yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. We've never done any Muppets related things, but it's also like
It's so nostalgic,
musical-ish.
Yeah, and it is a musical.
Yeah, it's a musical.
And I grew up watching the Muppet Show, and I still look back fondly on when John and I, it's probably toward the middle of our dating relationship. I got my wisdom teeth out and I was in bed for a few days recovering, and we just binged the Muppet Show because I had the whole DVD collection.
Yes.
And so it's just, I love the Muppet Show and I love the Muppets movie. So
yeah,
I'm excited.
Yes, we're very excited to cover it. So if you want to watch it ahead of time, it is currently streaming on Disney Plus. And we hope that we will see you guys back here next week.
See you next time.
I love you.